200 adults shopping in a supermarket were asked about the highest level of education they had completed and whether or not they smoked cigarettes. Results are summarized in this table here. So we have our smokers and non-smokers going up and down, and then across it shows the different levels of education. We'll start with answering just a couple kind of probability type questions based on our data. So part A says, what percent of the shoppers were smokers with only high school educations? So we're looking for the percent of the shoppers. So that means this is not a conditional probability. This is going to be just out of those 200 shoppers in total. We're looking for how many were smokers with only high school education. So I'm going to look for the overlap between smokers and high school education, which is 61. We're going to change that into a decimal. So 61 out of 200 gives me roughly 31%. Part B says, what percent of shoppers with only high school educations were smokers? So what percent of the shoppers with only high school educations? That's my condition. So now instead of looking at the 200, I only want to look at those with high school educations, which makes my denominator 93. Out of those 93 people, I'm looking for the smokers, which is 32. So 32 out of 93 gives me 0.34. Go ahead and try part C. In part C, the condition this time was that they had to be a smoker, so my denominator should be that 50. Out of those 50, I'm looking for just those with high school educations, which is 32. Number 2 says create a segmented bar graph comparing education level and amount of smokers and non-smokers. We want to make sure that everything we make here is clearly labeled. When we go to make a segmented bar graph, the first thing we want to decide is what our bars should represent. Should we have a bar for high school, 2-year college, and 4-year college, or do we want a bar for smokers and non-smokers? I like to make my bar have the least number of bars going up and down. So because there's only 2 options for smokers and non-smokers, I'm going to have just my 2 bars there. I'm going to have one for all of the smokers, and then one for all of the non-smokers. We want to label this category. These variables are both talking about smoking, so I'm just going to label that as smoking. Going up and down here, we are going to have just percentages. Both of your bars should always total up to 100%. So I need to start at 0 here and work my way up to 100. I'm going to count just by tens. You could pick any scale that you wanted to here, as long as it's clearly labeled, you should be fine. Notice that I did label that vertical axis with percent as well. We'll start with doing the smokers together. I'm going to start with making just a bar right here that goes all the way up to 100%. You can choose the width. You could make it very wide, you could make it very small, as long as both of these bars here are roughly the same width. So with my smokers, I'm looking at this category up here. I should have kind of 3 things within this bar. I should have the number or the percentage of high school education, percent of 2-year, and percent of 4-year. So I'm going to start with my high school education, and I'm going to find out what percent that is. So I'm going to do 32 and divide by 50. That gives me 64%. So I'm going to start here on the bottom. I'm going to go up to roughly 64, and I would label in there that this is 64%. So this part right here is representing my high school education. Now, I do want to make a key off to the side showing what each of these little pieces represents. Right now, I'm just going to leave this part blank and label that as high school education. My next option is 2-year college. I had 5 people fall into that category. So 5 out of the 50 that were smokers gives me 0.1, which is 10%. So I'm going to go up 10%. Remember, this is at 64, so I'm really now going up to 74. I'm going to label this as 10%. Now I want to make sure you can see the difference between my high school and my 2-year. So I'm going to pick a pattern, and I'm going to just put kind of some diagonal lines in there. Add that to my key, showing that these diagonal lines mean that you have 2-year of college education. Now this last part here is my last category, so this should make sense with my data. Let's go ahead and check though. I have 13 out of 50, which gives me 26%. If I'm looking here, 1, 2, it does look like we did pretty good. Again, I need a different pattern now to show that I'm looking at my 4-year college kids. So I'm going to put some little dots and add that to my key over here. Those dots equal a 4-year college. Now we decided to start with high school and put that on the bottom. You could have gone in any order here that you wanted. So you might have your 4-year college on the bottom, then high school, and then 2-year. Does not matter. Make sure you are including this key here with your labels. This tells the reader exactly what's happening within your picture. I'm going to have you guys go ahead and try to do the same thing, but now looking at non-smokers. Here is my bar for non-smokers. Hopefully yours looks the same as mine. If you went in the same order, it should look the exact same. The only thing that we're missing is a title, so I'm going to go ahead and title this Education and Smoking. You can be as creative or as non-creative with that title as you want, as long as you are making sure that you have a title. Number 3 says, do these data suggest there's an association between smoking and education level? Give statistical evidence to support your conclusion. Whenever it's asking you this question about association, what we want to do is compare the 2 bars. Do the bars look similar, or do these bars look different? Now, although there is definitely some similarities, both bars have around 10% of people going to 2-year college. There are some very big differences. I'm seeing 26% of smokers getting a 4-year degree, where non-smokers, it's almost half. Because of these big differences between the 2 groups, I'm going to say that there is an association. So the data suggests there is an association between smoking and education level. If the bars looked very, very similar, so in this case, you know, the high school degrees, the 2 years and the 4 years all were pretty darn close, then you would say that there is not an association. I do want to give some statistical evidence to support our conclusion. So we said that there is an association because there's some major differences between the 2 groups. My statistical evidence should point out some of those differences. So I'm going to focus on these high school degrees here. I'm going to say while 64% of smokers had only a high school education, 41% of non-smokers had the same degree. Your statistical evidence may look different. You may have decided to talk about the 4-year college difference, how more non-smokers have that degree than smokers. But as long as you have some data here kind of tying back to your conclusion, you should be good. Number 4 says, does this indicate that students who start smoking while in high school tend to give up the habit if they complete college? Explain. Take a minute to pause your video. I want you guys to jot down some of your ideas. Okay, hopefully you said that no, this does not indicate that students could smoke in high school and then tend to give up the habit if they complete college. In order for that statement to be supported by this data, we would have to be collecting data over time. I would have to survey some students in high school and then survey them again when they get to college. That's not what happened here. We just surveyed 200 adults that were shopping. We asked them what they were doing at that time. This data does not show change over time.